This oil pastel tree artwork is great for practicing blending and shading with oil pastels. Oil pastels are one of my favorite materials to work with because it's like painting with a crayon. It's a little messy, but it's easy to clean up, and I just think you can blend and add pops of color, really enhancing your shading and blending skills. I will show you how to use multiple colors to create a gradient that goes from dark to light, and how to draw a tree leaving gaps in the background that you can fill in with your practice. You can use whatever color scheme that you would like, any style of tree, and I always start with a colorful piece of paper to make my colors pop. If you love learning about art, support my channel and subscribe. The first decision you need to make is which direction you would like to turn your paper, vertically or horizontally. I'm choosing horizontally because it fits on my camera screen, so you can see everything that I'm drawing. I'm using a pencil and I'm drawing lightly in case I need to erase, and I'm going to start with 2 lines that curve out towards the center of the paper that go all the way to the bottom. I'm going to draw 1 branch from each, and then I'm going to go back and try and make it 3D from there. So I'm going to draw another line, a line more towards the center, and I'm going to kind of fan out doing 1 line at a time. Then I'll go back and make it 3-dimensional by adding a second parallel line or branch out to make a Y shape. This does take practice, and you can just draw it 1 line at a time if you need to. You could do any style of tree. Your tree could be super complicated. It could have more wavy or curvy branches or more straight and geometric. It depends on what you're going for. I really like using a tree as a subject because there's so many examples of artists who have used trees throughout their artwork. It's important to find balance in your branches. You want enough branches that you have a variety of large, small, and medium shapes in your background, which is where you're going to be adding color. If you add too many branches and your spaces are really small and complicated, it will be harder to do your gradients. Make friends with your pencil and erase to change the style of your branches and how many that you have. Your tree can be thick or thin, and I always like to look at trees as I'm drawing, and a trick to this is if you Google tree silhouette or tree clip art black and white, it gives you really simplified images to look at. I also like looking out the window, and when trees in the winter don't have leaves on them, if you really look at their branches, the way they interact and cross each other creates such fun shapes and interesting shapes that you can then use to color in. So keep it simple, make it complicated, it's up to you. My advice when drawing anything is to start with your largest shapes first and then go back in and do your smaller shapes or your more detail. So you can see I started with the base trunk of the tree. I added 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of larger branches, which all had a Y at the end to go off the page to create a nice little area. And then I'm looking at my largest sections and filling it in with some branches that kind of touch and overlap the other branches. And so you can see that Y shape I'm really repeating. Not all of your branches need to go off the page, but a lot of them do, so you have enclosed spaces to fill with your oil pastels. In art, a gradient is a gradual color transition. So you're blending color from dark to light from one color to another. Now you can do light to dark, but I always like to start with my darkest color, and I'm choosing a classic color scheme here of warm colors, red to orange to yellow. Now look what I'm using with the orange, or look how I'm using it. I am not avoiding the red. I'm not trying to keep the orange clean and not touch the red. I want to go down into the red section and pull with the orange. Then I go back and add my first color, which in this case is red, and then I'm going to go over it one more time, pressing down even more gently with my oil pastel so it's a true fade, a true gradual transition from red to orange. And I'm going to repeat my steps with the yellow. The yellow and orange need to make friends. Don't try and keep your oil pastels clean. A clean pastel is a pastel that has not lived its full life. So you can see this very satisfying transition, and I always go back and blend more than one time, and the last time I do it, I'm pressing down much lighter so there's truly a gradual transition. It kind of looks like tie-dye. So what I love about blending is it's shading and it's blending all at the same time. So now that I have this section, I'm going to add a little bit of black because I love contrast, and adding black in the corner is going to make an even darker, almost shadowed area with the red. And you can see I'm pulling the black into the red to create that really dark area that creates a beautiful shadow and just makes your colors pop. Opposite, I'm going to use white at the very end, and my white has seen better days. So with my white, I'm going to do the same thing at the very end of my gradient, so I have a true blend, a true gradual transition of color from dark to light. You can see why it's so important to go back to your color here, because the white's very dominant and it didn't blend to the yellow without taking the yellow and pulling back down into that yellow section. Notice that the only colors that touch are the two colors that are next to each other. I'm going to speed things up and I'm going to repeat this color scheme more than one time. If you have a color scheme that you like, repeat it while you're thinking about it and really practice using those colors together. Red, orange, and yellow is such a classic color combination. It's like fire or flames, and that's just a good place to practice and to start. I'm using just those three base colors and then black and white, but your gradient can be a rainbow. As long as your colors are blending from one to the next, that's a gradient. Always remember when blending with oil pastels is that it's not just blocks of color next to each other. You are truly blending and pulling and mixing the colors on the page. So think of it like painting. You might mix your colors on a palette. You're doing all your mixing on the paper with the pastel. You can also see I'm not using my finger. I have lots of students, and I've been guilty of this myself, that want to use your finger for blending. The problem with that is that your finger is lifting and pulling the oil pastel off the page, so it makes your colors muddier and it makes your colors less vibrant and less thick. I'm not saying I don't do a little blending with my finger here or there, but if you're tempted to use your finger, instead, just go ahead and use the pastel and think of it as an extension of your finger. I'm going to move on to a different color combination, and with my pack of oil pastels, and I'm going to put my materials in the description box. This is my favorite classroom set. I'm going to move on to my cool colors. So for this progression, I'm going to start with purple as being my darkest, and I have multiple blues to choose from. So I'm going to do a dark blue next and then a light blue. So I have my nice dark purple area, then I'm taking my darker blue and I'm pulling that purple out so it has a nice blend from purple to blue. Going back with my purple to make sure there's a true transition and one color isn't more dominant than the other. Going back with that second color to make sure there's enough space for my lighter blue. And there's that beautiful sky blue that I'm putting on top. It's actually a little bit more dominant than the darker blue. You can see there's like a line of separation. So then taking that middle color, which is the darker blue, and really making a nice blend. Now I'm doing very smooth blending. You could do this with a texture, you could make it swirl. So just because I'm doing a smooth blending, this is kind of for beginners or for practice. So you can do it this way if you're going for this look, but that's just one texture when using oil pastels. I love how vibrant that white is. So I'm going to take that blue and pull it down. So I have my lightest at the end, transitioning to light blue, dark blue, and purple. It kind of looks like a teardrop. Definitely reminds me of tie-dye as well. Always go back and forth, and if you think one color is too dominant or doesn't have enough of a voice, go back and add it until you're happy. Blending is a verb. That means you're going to be doing something. You're in charge of going back and forth and making it look the way that you would like. I can't help it. I'm using the black to make my purple as dark as possible. Sometimes black can muddy up your colors, but I also think if used correctly and used just a little bit, it's a great way to create shadows and create depth. Just like before, I'm going to speed things up again and repeat this color scheme since I've already practiced it once and I have my colors laid out right next to me. So you could be more dominant with your purples, you could show up more blue, you could make this area darker by using more black or lighter by focusing more on the white. I love this project because it makes me think of stained glass, and I think it's a great way to practice color theory, blending, and because your shapes are abstract, they're just shapes. The tree is the area that needs to look like a tree, but the shapes in the background don't have to be any particular shape. If you're looking to level up, try out my donut blending video. And this is a great way to level up your skills to draw something and blend it with oil pastels using gradients, but making it look like a real object. This is one of my students' favorites, so I'll put that link above. It's my donut oil pastel artwork using the same technique of gradients, but focusing on an object that's recognizable and delicious. So you can see I'm adding my black here and it really creates a nice anchor point. It almost looks like a river or flowing water. I'm very happy with my contrast of warm and cool colors. So you could do any color scheme at all. You could focus on warm versus cool. You could do like a color wheel from left to right. And I'm just gonna play around with the colors that I have available. I am using my Faber Castell 24 pack of oil pastels that my students use as well. And this brand is really great because the pastels last a long time. And even if you have a smaller set of pastels or a different set, and you could even do this with colored pencils, crayons blend a little bit. You could do the same technique. I've had students use acrylic paint, and we made shades and tints using a tree as our background. So use whatever materials you have and play with whatever colors you have. I want my tree to be really happy, vibrant, and colorful, like stained glass, and so I'm going to try and use a lot of different color combinations. This one's pretty simple: dark green, light green, yellow, of course using white on the end. And I'm just gonna play around with different color schemes, repeating them so the background has a nice even balance of my colors. So I'm not thinking too hard about where the colors go, I'm just kind of letting it happen. You can see instead of black, I put a little bit of blue at the bottom of this gradient. It's not as dark, but it does make a nice contrast. I'm gonna repeat this as well. And keep in mind that I did speed my video up to twice the speed I actually created it. Because you've seen me do this before and I'm repeating my steps, I'm going to speed things along so you can watch me create gradients and colors, thinking about where I'm organizing my color schemes. This is a time lapse, so I'm going way faster than I'm actually going in real life. And I'm dividing up some more spaces, playing around with my different color schemes. I really love this like red to pink gradient. I think it's really lovely. And I don't add black to all of them, but I do add white because I just love the way the white gives it that highlight and that lighter vibe. I am also trying out a gray color scheme, so I do black, gray, and then white, and that one's really fun, and I like how dark it is compared to the other ones. So like I said earlier, I'm not paying attention to a particular color scheme. I'm just playing around with what I have available, trying to figure out as many gradients as I can, and I'm balancing each section by not putting the same two gradients next to each other, but trying to have a balance of, you know, the same gradients on both sides. You could keep it very monochromatic, you could keep it warm versus cool. It depends on what your goals are, and it depends on how many colors that you have. So what I'm going to do next is pay attention to this really large section. I did add, as you can see, a few more branches to it because I wanted it to not be such a huge area. So this is a part of the tree. This is kind of where like the trunk goes into its first branches. And because this is nature and it's, you know, an artwork about a tree, I thought I would do a green color scheme. And I think that will look really nice in this large area. You can see I have a branch that didn't go all the way off the page. So I mentioned in the beginning of the video, you want most of your branches to go all the way off the page so you're really zoomed in close to the tree, and that way you'll have these closed off spaces to fill in with your gradients. But because this is down at the bottom, I like the idea of having like a smaller branch that didn't quite go off the page. I just thought that was a really nice different approach. So you can see this is a color scheme I've used before: green, light green, and yellow. And because it's a large area, I'm taking my time to really fill up my space, really make sure that this is a nice gradient because it is such a large area. I also made sure to use blue at the very beginning too, and end with the white since it's such a large area. I thought that I'd have more room for this gradient to go from like the cool green all the way to the more yellow green. And so I'm also doing that in the inside of the branch to give it a little more depth too, just to kind of get this area as smooth and as really nice as I would like it to be. As your spaces start to get filled, it becomes more challenging to figure out which color scheme to do in each section because you want variety. You don't want the same color scheme right next to each other, or maybe you do, but I don't. I want to kind of mix and match I don't want a blue right next to a blue. I want to kind of have a balance of warm and cool on both sides. So as you kind of fill up your sections, it does get more challenging to figure out which color scheme to use because you're running out of spaces. Speaking of balance, I have this other large section to fill, and I decided since I did a cool gradient on one side, I'm going to stick to a warm gradient on the other. So I'm going back to that first gradient of red, blending and overlapping with my orange, and then I'm going to fill it out to yellow and get my gradient opposite or contrasting the gradient on the other side. I really like this color scheme. I know it works because I've used it many times, and I'm just going to kind of fill my space. I'm not sure if I'm going to do black on the edge or leave it a little bit lighter and with less contrast. We'll just have to see, because I also am starting to realize I need to decide what color my tree is going to be. And so deciding what color that is something I've been really thinking about as I'm finishing up filling out these spaces. So this gradient is tried and true. I know it works. I have a nice large space to fill it. And remember, I'm doing smooth shading, but you don't have to. I'm going to speed things up again and think about color schemes that I either haven't used or would fit in those little tiny branches that I have left. So I'm doing this really nice like purple pink to white gradient. And All the time I'm doing that, I'm kind of thinking, okay, what color do I want my tree? And I'm leaning towards brown because I only use that kind of reddish brown in some of my warm color schemes. And I think if I do black with it, it's going to really stand out. So I'm just kind of finishing up my gradients here. This video would be over an hour long if you watch me do this in real time. So I know my students don't want to see me drawing for an hour. So I'm speeding things along, and now I'm finally ready to consider, okay, what color do I want my branches? I'm going to start with black because I know for a fact that black will connect all these colors together, and it's so dark, it's going to pop in contrast against this rainbow of a tree that I've created. Now, I don't want it to just be flat black, so I'm going to take my brown and do a little bit of shading with it. I'm not doing a gradient, I'm only doing two colors together, but I want the tree to be brown, but the black is like the darkest shadow, and I know the black will really give this tree organization. So again, this is not a realistic work of art. I've never seen a tree in real life that when you look through it, you had this amount of color behind it. Yes, beautiful sunsets with a tree in front of it will kind of fragment the sunset into pretty pieces, but this is a very kind of expressive take on what a tree might look like. So I'm using the black to kind of create the crisp outline of each section, and then I'm using the brown to kind of pull and create a very natural looking tree color. So I want it to stand out. There's so much going on. It'd be really hard to pick a color that I haven't used before that would kind of cut through it. So keep that in mind. You could keep it even more simple. And I said it earlier in the video, I've done this with acrylic paint where students pick one color and they do shades and tints of just one color in the background. And then for that case, you would have way more options of what your tree color could be. Because I have done a rainbow collage here, I'm thinking black and brown. I'm really loving how it's cutting through the color. It's giving my eye something to look at. It's giving it clean organization, and it's really standing out against all those gradients that I've practiced. That's why I really like this work of art, because not only is it fun to create, but you're practicing a really important skill over and over again in a safe environment. You're just doing blocks of color. It doesn't have to look like anything other than that. And trees are so random in nature. There's really no right or wrong way to create a tree because trees grow a whole bunch of different ways. So let loose and have fun. This is not just great practice, but it really does create a beautiful work of art. It always reminds me of stained glass, and there's plenty of artists that work with this theme. You could look at Gustav Klimt's The Tree of Life. Georgia O'Keeffe has done lots of tree drawings, and Pierre Mondrian, who's famous for his primary color paintings, also did a whole series of trees that are fragmented. Keep in mind that oil pastels are messy, so be conscious of where you're laying down your palm. And you maybe saw me a few times in the video lay down a tissue, or you could lay down a scratch piece of paper to make sure you're not smudging your art. You could also do this technique with chalk pastels, which in my opinion are even more messy. And so if you do that, just make sure you're aware when you're doing these final steps, you're aware of where you're putting down your palm and how you're smudging your art. You can always go back and touch it up once you're done too. And you can see I'm rotating my paper. I want my hand to have an easy path to create the tree. You don't have to just have your paper sitting on the table one direction. Turn it around as you work to make it easier for your hand. I'm just loving this brown and black. I think it really cuts through everything nicely. This is the point that I love looking at my work of art because I just feel like it's finished. Making sure my lines are nice and clean, and this is just a great way to express yourself, a great way to explore color and blending with oil pastels. Thank you so much for sticking around and making art with me, and if you're interested in more oil pastel tutorials, check these out. Also, if you want to see what my students are up to in my classroom, follow me on Instagram at thatartteacher_Machado. Check out my website, thatartteacher.com, for my full-length lesson plans, links to all of my videos, and student examples.